Welcome to the BiggerPockets Business Podcast.
Show number 3.
Welcome to a real-world MBA from the School of Hard Knocks, where entrepreneurs reveal what it really takes to make it. Whether you're already in business or you're on your way there, this show is for you. This is BiggerPockets Business.
Hey there, everybody. It is Jay Scott here with my very muscular co-host. At least she was bragging about her muscles earlier.
Right. Check out these guns, baby.
My beautiful, awesome, and amazing wife, Mrs. Carol Scott. How you doing today, Carol Scott?
I am good. You're always so kind to me in these intros, and I just love it. I've got to tell you what, though. I am so done moving furniture. Are you over it?
Oh my God. We have been moving furniture, for those listening. We've been moving furniture around for 2 weeks.
From room to room to room. We're selling our house. And we are, you know me, I'm obsessed with having to stage, even though we live in a really super hot market where realistically I could probably make 3 phone calls and shove a for sale sign on the front door and it would sell in about 10 minutes. I've got to have it be the most perfectly staged house there ever was. So we've been dragging furniture up, down, inside and out, rearranging rooms for 2 weeks now. It's ridiculous. I'm done.
Can I tell people about how you are literally emptying our house, buying stuff from Costco, Craigslist, and other places to stage our house?
and I'm returning it all, though.
You're going to return it?
Receipts. Here's your tip of the day, people. Get this. So I discovered in this house staging of my own house adventure that you can return something from Bed Bath & Beyond for an entire year. Kohl's forever, as long as you've got the receipt. So I'm returning all this stuff after we sell the house.
Same with Costco.
Oh yeah, Costco forever and ever and ever. I've got so much stuff that's going back.
Okay, let's jump into our show. We have an amazing show today. We have a guy named Brent Underwood, who is probably the single best creative marketing person I've ever spoken with. He's going to tell us all about how we can do a better job of marketing our businesses, marketing our products, marketing ourselves. He's going to tell us all about how he got started in this career by sending a blind email. Basically, he sent the right email to the right person at the right time. He's going to tell us how he's gotten books on the New York Times bestseller list. He's going to tell us how he's gotten musicians record deals. He's going to tell us about the hostel he owns and how he used a goat to promote his hostel. He's even going to tell us about a ghost town that he purchased and how he's going to make a ton of money from it. So without any further ado, let's bring on Brent Underwood.
Brent, thank you so much for joining us today. It is so good to see you.
Yeah, same. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Hey, Brent, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks.
So Brent, where are you today? Are you over at Brass Check, or are you at your hostel, or are you calling us from your ghost town?
It's a good question. I am in Austin, Texas at the moment. I am at our Brass Check offices, which I come into maybe once or twice a month. So it's a big occasion. You know, it's always fun to get back here, have some free coffee, that type of good stuff.
There you go. Gotta love the perks of your own awesome company, right? That's a beautiful thing. Well, I'd really like to just jump right on in. So you've been successful in so many areas, Brent, and I just can't tell you, there's so much to really unpack in your entire story, in your background. But of course, what I'm really, truly in awe of is all the amazing stuff you've accomplished in your marketing career. So I'd really like to jump right into the point where you really kickstarted that marketing career. So we'd love to hear about the Tucker Max and Ryan Holiday story. And for our listeners who aren't familiar with these two, just let us know who are Tucker and Ryan.
Sure. So I'll backtrack just a little bit to provide some more context. I think is important for when I talk about those two. I went to school for finance and real estate. I went to grad school in New York, and I graduated, and I traveled for about 6 months. And then coming back, I was looking for something basically where I wouldn't have to wear a suit, to be fully honest with you. And that was my main goal. I worked for a month at an investment bank and found it just to be not suitable for what I wanted to do. And, I saw the handwriting on the wall that I could go down that path and kind of get those golden handcuffs, so to speak, of a nice apartment, a nice car, and need to have this job to support them. So I was basically looking for anything to not do that. And Tucker Max is an author who wrote a book that, in college I thought was really funny. He writes about getting drunk and doing dumb stuff that I think that a lot of college students did. And so I reached out to him, just a blind email. I think blind emails are an incredible way to kind of like connect with people. You really never know what's going to happen. And Tucker was working on a book at the time that never ended up coming out, but he was like, listen, why don't we try you out as a research assistant? So my job was to kind of collect material related to the book that he was working on. Nothing to do with what I went to school for. I went to school for real estate and finance, but I thought this was like an interesting way to develop a skill. And obviously Tucker was somebody that I looked up to. So it was like an interesting way to work with a mentor of sorts. And I would say about 2 weeks into that, Tucker was like, listen, this is not a fit.
Can I step back and ask a quick question? So at some point you decided you had this formal education and things unrelated to marketing, unrelated to writing. But at some point you said, I'm going to reach out to Tucker Max and I'm going to be his researcher. So what was the driving force? What were you looking to do? Where were you looking to go that said, this is the right next move?
Sure. I was more just looking for something interesting to do. Cause like, again, I went to Columbia. So it was like a very expensive education. And like, it was a very like defined path. You went to Columbia, you went to an investment bank in order to pay off your loans. And it was very kind of clear, but I was pretty young at the time. I was 22 when I graduated from Columbia. And so I figured I still had a couple more years to maybe bounce around a little bit and learn some different skill sets. I think that, the most valuable you can be kind of as a professional is when you can combine different skill sets in a unique way. And so I kind of thought that very early on. And Tucker was doing this thing about writing. And obviously writing is important. Like it's like how we communicate. And so I thought there was something that I could learn there from him that I could apply to my life in the future, no matter what I was going to do. And so with an opportunity like that, when Tucker, to begin with, Tucker wasn't paying me. It was a big jump from going from an investment bank where I was making, $80, $100 an hour to where you would go back and basically be working for free. But the skills that I developed there, like they set me on a trajectory of my life that, we might not even be talking if it wasn't for that blind email. So I think more than anything else, there's like a curiosity and like a way to learn a skill set without having to go back to school. Cause I was a bit disillusioned with school, to be fully honest with you. Like I went to grad school. I thought I was going to come out and learn all the things I needed to know. I didn't. And so Tucker was a way to, dip my toes into something else, learn a new set of skills.
And so how do you send a blind email to somebody like Tucker Max? Let's say somebody wanted to send you, and I'm not setting you up right here. Please don't start sending emails to Brent.
No, please do. I think that like Tucker's email was very visible. It was publicly facing. And I think that like Ryan Holiday, who we'll get to, is another big mentor and like kind of my business partner now, has this theory about like emailers, is what he calls it. And so basically, to fast forward a little bit, Ryan wrote a book and the book did very well. And afterwards, a very, very well-known head coach of an NFL team reached out and emailed Ryan. And Ryan was like, wow, that's crazy that like this head coach of this very successful team would just email me after my small book come out. But then we step back and think about it. It's not strange that he would do that because that's what he's been doing his whole life. I think that like certain successful people, maybe all successful people, when there's something that interests them, they just kind of shoot off a note to that person. And that's kind of how they build this web of interesting people that they're connected with. And so for me as like a 22-year-old, I was like, I have nothing to lose to like shoot an email to Tucker Max. And there's actually a guy here in Austin who's become a friend of mine as well, named Charlie Hone. And Charlie Hone has this book, at the time it was a PDF, called The Recession-Proof Grad. And this came out in maybe 2009. And it was basically like outlining his way of connecting with very interesting people and how he did so. And basically by offering them to like do some free work for them. And so it was more like, I had read Charlie's thing. I was like, hey, this is interesting. Why don't I try this out? Maybe I connect with some interesting people. And so I emailed Tucker. And I think that like, that blind email has changed the course of my life. But since then, I try to actually, I have a calendar. I try to email 10 or 20 people that I don't know every month just to kind of connect with them, see what happens. Because again, you don't have anything to lose. And obviously a lot of those will go unreplied to, but a lot of my closest friends and people that I spend the most time with have come from that. And I think
that one tip you just provided an hour's worth of value right there. That's
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think that like,
what have you got to lose, right? Why not?
Yeah. What do you have to lose? And also it's like, it's a lifetime skill. It's not something like, for 1 month, I'm going to email people. And then once I reach a certain level of success, I'm going to keep emailing them. I think that like the illustration of the head coach, like this guy is the guy that like could probably call the president, if you wanted to and get him on the phone. But he's still emailing people when he finds it interesting, just because, it's a way to connect with them. It's a way to reach out. It's a way to continue doing that their whole life. So I don't think that like this blind email thing is something that you do just when you're 22 and trying to work with Tucker Max. It's something that you do when you're like 32, 42, 52, 62, kind of your whole life. And it's a way to, again, just like connect with people. And I think particularly now with like social media and stuff, it's amazing who you can get in contact with, like, with some of my most recent projects, when I need to learn a skill set or I think I can benefit from somebody, I'll send out 5 or 6 emails to the top people in their field. And again, if 1 or 2 of those people come back, you end up having a conversation that you could never imagine you would have had otherwise.
That's great.
Wonderful.
So I cut you off there a little bit. I apologize. You worked for Tucker for a couple of weeks, and it wasn't going great.
Yeah, it wasn't. I wasn't the best researcher. I'm not the most organized person, but at the time I was pretending to be for about a matter of weeks. And I think that facade dissolved in front of Tucker's eyes. But he was like, listen, I like you. I think you work hard. You're an interesting kid. So I'm going to introduce you to my friend. My friend is named Ryan Holiday. And at the time, Ryan was a director of marketing at American Apparel. And I believe he was also 22 at the time, maybe 23. And so I didn't know who Ryan was then, but I was like, well, obviously this guy's doing something right. And it was, again, like, Ryan had this like super cool persona of this guy that operated in the dark arts. He worked with guys like Tucker and Robert Greene and Dov Charney from American Apparel and Tim Ferriss and all these guys that I kind of like thought were interesting. And so Ryan and I met up in New York. He was working on a book at the time called Trust Me, I'm Lying, which is kind of a media expose of how the media works. And I helped Ryan put together the marketing for Trust Me, I'm Lying. The book did really well. Ryan and I got along very well. And that was about 7 years ago. And today we still work together on almost all of our projects. Like Ryan and I have a company called Brass Check, and we do a lot of marketing for authors and startups and musicians and stuff like that. But even outside of Brass Check, whether it's our real estate projects or anything else, Ryan and I probably do the majority of them together. And again, if I'm kind of tracing the lineage back there, it all goes to a blind email. So, I mean, yeah, it's pretty fun.
So it's one of the best emails you ever sent, right? That's
definitely
shaped the course of all of your future endeavors.
Absolutely. I could still be buttoned up in a suit in New York at an investment bank, which I don't think I'd be very happy doing.
And this doesn't surprise me because we did some research. We've listened to you a little bit, and you were being super humble. I want to talk a little bit about Brass Check because you're doing some awesome, amazing marketing stuff. Carol mentioned it in the intro. Basically, you are the term used to be guerrilla marketing, maybe. I don't know what the term is now, but it's basically a very creative type of marketing. Can you give us some examples of the type of marketing you guys are doing and who you're doing it for?
Sure. I think that like with Brass Check, what we try to think of is, when people think about marketing, they think of like PR and marketing. And PR in the traditional sense is, you develop a relationship with a reporter, you kind of call on a favor to write about a company or something like that. But Ryan and I are more just like, what interesting things can we do to attract the media to us? And I think it's an important point where like everybody wants press, but nobody wants to do anything interesting. And so if you want people to talk about your project, you have to give them something to talk about. And so I think that's kind of like one of the central ideas that we think about behind Brass Check is like, what can we do around the context of this book or company or things like that to draw media attention back to us? Of course, we do the basic blocking and tackling of kind of the traditional PR stuff. But to give you an example, so like, let's say that we have a book coming out. I'll give you an example. We worked with a guy named Jerry DeWitt, and Jerry is a former Pentecostal minister that one day woke up and decided that he wasn't a believer anymore, And so he wrote a book called Hope After Faith. And so, when we think about a book like Hope After Faith, it's like, there's this idea there, a minister that no longer believes in God, that, yeah, we did the things like we would do podcast appearances or like articles on different websites. But then it's like, how can we create an event around this that the media would come to? So we came up with the idea to create a church service for non-believers in the heart of Louisiana, kind of in the middle of the Bible Belt. And we invited some press to it. And then the New York Times ended up coming out, CNN came out, and, all basically, and they, at the same time, it all drew back to the ideas of the book. So I think that's something important when you're thinking about marketing is like, anybody could get attention for throwing $1 million out of an airplane, but it's not going to necessarily connect to the kind of like marching orders of your company or kind of the ideas in your book. So kind of like when we think about it is like, what can we do around this kind of idea, whether that's for a company or a book or a musician, to kind of bring media attention back to it?
Very fun. So it sounds like you are almost an expert in creating experiences, right? To drive that marketing. Is that a fair assessment?
Experiences, or just like, I don't want to call them stunts because I think stunts is like kind of like an overused term that kind of like simplifies what we do, but like fun things that attract fun media attention. I think that like at the same time, like when people think about media, sometimes they think about it wrong. It's like, oh, I hope that Business Insider will write an article about me. But when you think about it, like it's a seller's market, meaning if you put yourself in the shoes of that Business Insider writer, his job every day is to wake up and write 3 to 4 articles about interesting stuff that's going to get him page views, that's going to get him basically his salary. And so I try to think like, what are the incentives of this writer? And I think that you can do that in basically any context. But with media, it's like, all right, I am the Business Insider business reporter. My job each day is to create 3 to 4 articles that are going to be interesting for my readership. And so I try to think like, what thing can I do that would be interesting for him that would make his job easier? And so I think if you come up with an idea that's easy, at the same time, it's like they're not necessarily doing you a favor, almost you're doing them a favor as kind of creating this interesting idea for them to run with. And so I think if you flip the kind of like way you view media on its head and think like, it's not them doing you a favor, it's like a mutually beneficial thing. They need a story, you need an outlet. You kind of just make a swap. Then it kind of like frees you just to think. And like for me, what I like to do is just, let's say you do want to go onto Time Magazine or Business Insiders, go to one of the reporters' feeds and just kind of scroll through what they wrote about in the past, see what kind of headlines they're writing, and think about like, how can I do something similar in that vein? And I think what attracted me and Ryan most to the idea of marketing is like, we have fun with it. I think that like, for me, it's almost like a game. It's like, can I get this person to write about it? Can we do that? And it's a skill set that you can apply to to everything. Since we've done it with books, I've applied it to my own personal projects. We've used successfully to get a lot of press and things like that. I think just making a game out of it's a big part of it.
That's awesome. I like the game. So in the spirit of, I wonder if I do X, if I can get this person to write about it. What's an example that you're so proud of that you did try X and you got someone to write about it and it was even more successful than you expected?
One of the most fun ones that I had is like, I was living in New York at the time, and a guy I lived very close to was a guy named Nick, and he was a musician that goes by Young and Sick. And Nick at the time had put out some demos, and we were trying to think of, there's so much music out there. Anybody can put out music. How can we get attention for this essentially unknown musician? And so we came up with a strategy that we weren't going to release what he looked like or what if it was a male or a female. We were just going to put out some songs. And our goal at the time was to get on Pitchfork. Pitchfork is kind of like a tastemaker blog for the music industry. Particularly, this was 6 years ago. And so you have to think through like, all right, my goal is to get to Pitchfork. You could blind pitch Pitchfork until you're blue in the face about a new demo from an unknown artist, and it's never going to get any attention. What you need to do is like create a handle is what I call it. Like, what is a handle that you're going to pick up the story, bring it to a friend, and they're being able to talk about the story a little bit more. So provide more context to the story, not just like, oh, this guy has a great song out, but like, what other things are you giving people to talk about the project? And so for Nick, it was like the anonymous aspect, nobody knew what this was. And so if we think about it further, it's like, if we want to be on Pitchfork, where does Pitchfork get their stories? And so for Pitchfork at the time, there's a blog called Rose Quartz, and Rose Quartz is a tiny little music blog. It's called like rosequartz.blogspace.com, maybe 100 readers. And so we found that one writer at Pitchfork would get all the stories from Rose Quartz. And again, that kind of just came from studying him on Twitter, seeing what he was writing about. And so then our goal became like, if we can get on Rose Quartz, obviously we're going to get onto Pitchfork. And so it makes it a little bit easier, and like every journalist likes to think that they discovered something. So if you can put it in front of them in like a newsfeed or a blog or like an anonymous email or something like that. And so we sent some anonymous emails to the writer over at Rose Quartz, and we're like, who is this guy? Like, I can't find anything about him. He sounds kind of like The Weeknd or like interesting acts at the time. And sure enough, a couple of days later, Rose Quartz wrote about it. And then the next day, Pitchfork wrote about it. And so then he was a unknown musician with a feature on Pitchfork. And then from there, we just did a variety of other fun stunts around it. Can you just like build this story around it? And each time it's like adding layers to the story and adding layers to the story to the point where like Nick now is a very successful musician. He signed a great deal with Capitol Records, and he's kind of living out his dream. So that was personally really rewarding for me.
So fun.
I love that story. And that story, basically, there's a book in there. There's so many tips that I think we could spend hours unpacking. But there's one that I've heard that story. And there's one thing I want to touch on that you didn't. I'd love to get some more information. You talked about, and you basically said, marketing is not just an event. It's a story. And you're building a story. And if you put out a press release, if you do an event type marketing, that is great. You get some press, but then it goes away. But when you tell a story, you have lasting impressions. You build a story. People like stories in their heads. With Nick, I remember hearing somewhere that with him, I think he was the one where it was unclear because of the pitch of his voice if he was a man or a woman. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you played that story?
Yeah, it was kind of like with Nick, he's saying in this kind of like range where he couldn't tell if it was a guy or a girl. And so we would play around with it. Like I remember we had a reporter from Spin call me, and every other word I would alternate he and she and they and them. And it just built this kind of like mystique around him, and like this, like, who is this guy? How can we discover it? And then, I egged it on in my own way where like I would go on and create fake email addresses and email different blogs and be like, who is this guy? I can't find anything about him, but he's got a feature on Pitchfork, and just like leaving nothing to chance. Because I think that, like, again, going back to it, if you put yourself in the position of a blogger, they have to get a lot of stories, but they get a lot of input as well. So you can't just hope that they write about something. You want to like kind of like make it a sure fact. And so, yeah, with Nick, we did that. And then I think another fun thing that we did to follow that up is because he was this anonymous act, at the time, Tor was really exciting, the anonymous web and this type of thing. And I remember this was about 6 years ago. And so we decided that for a second song, we were going to release it on Tor. Just again, because not that anybody was going to download it on Tor. It wasn't that. It was like wrapping that story, like you said, around it. Because Nick stood for privacy, we were going to release it in the most private part of the internet. And I remember we released it down there. We screenshotted all of it. I pitched a reporter at Pitchfork or at Business Insider. I was like, hey, like, do you know anything about Tor? I heard this musician just released a song down there. I can't find anything out about him. Do you have any more info? Kind of like putting them on their own little kind of like goose hunt in a way. And sure enough, Business Insider wrote about it. And then we took that article and we went over to Forbes, and there's a privacy report at Forbes. And I was like, hey, this is crazy. Can you believe this musician released a song down there? I still can't find anything about him. I actually know the guy. And it's even more interesting than that. He not only released a song down there because he stood for privacy, but he turned down 6-figure recording deals to release a song down there. And to be fully transparent, he hadn't. But, it was an interesting context, interesting story around it. And sure enough, the next day, the headline on Forbes was why this musician turned down 6-figure recording deals to release a song in the darkest part of the internet. And so it's kind of like with that headline and that context around the song, then you want to tell your friend about it. You want to be like, oh my God, did you hear about this guy that released a song down on the Tor? It's crazy. So instead of becoming just like this artist with 2 demos out there on SoundCloud, there's a story already building around him. And that story like continues not just like in personal conversations between you and your friend, but also in the media. The media always needs more context to develop a blog post around somebody. So now they're like, this hot unknown act, young and sick, that is a feature on Pitchfork that's released a song in the darkest part of the internet that turned down recording deals, and all this type of stuff just builds into become this kind of like media narrative, as I call it. So I think that with Brash Tech, what we try to do is set that media narrative pretty early. Like, what are the media going to talk about? Because a lot of times the media can be lazy. They're going to basically repeat whatever they see on a different article or on Wikipedia or something like that. And so if you can provide them the story that you want them to see, then it almost is like a self-fulfilling prophecy where they talk about it over and over and over again.
That sounds like so crazy much fun. I can't even stand it. Like I'm just envisioning your team, that you guys like sitting in a room going through this creative process, being like, what can we do next? And what can we do next? And oh my gosh, did you see what he just wrote about us? And let's send him down another rabbit hole and see how this thing really snowballs.
We were like 23 and we were sitting around exactly in a Brooklyn apartment. Where it's like, what can we get away with in some sense is the way to look at it. But also just like, it's fun because then it's like immediate response. And I think that it's interesting. Press lives interesting in like the public's mind. Like it's like saying as featured on Forbes carries this great weight, but really it doesn't necessarily mean what people think, nor does it hold necessarily the weight that people may think, particularly when it comes to like converting sales and things like that. But like public facing, it's like very impressive. And it's like ego, to be fully transparent with you. It's like, it feels good. It's like, oh yeah, Nick was on Forbes, Nick was in Business Insider, Nick was on Pitchfork.
You created an origin story.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a great origin story there, and still repeated today. When Nick has talked about, there's still mentions of the time they released a song on tour, or throughout his career, we've just done fun stuff. We did a showcase for South by Southwest here in Austin, where Nick performed just for dogs. There was no humans allowed at the animal shelter. So just like, again, fun things where like everybody does a South by Southwest show, but like, let's do something a little bit different to give people something to talk about. Because again, the press needs, you can see that headline, like artist performs dog only show at South by Southwest. It's like an easy story for them. And so just like, again, because Nick's a friend, he's more like lenient and he's open to doing these types of things. But I think if you're thinking about your own project and you're thinking, how can I get press? It's like, well, what are you going to do that's interesting that the press wants to write about? And it doesn't have to be that hard. It can be something pretty basic. I mean, even to riff a little bit more on this topic, a week ago, I own a hostel here in Austin called HK Austin.
Yes, and we want to get to that. But no, go ahead.
I'll just continue the press angle. And we're thinking like, we haven't been in the press in a while. We haven't had any, there's no real reason to talk about HK Austin. We've been doing some things. And I read on Craigslist, actually, again, this is just a week ago, that a guy was trying to get rid of a baby mini goat. It was a male mini goat. He was going to kill the mini goat because I guess they only want the females. And so an hour later, I had adopted this goat, and he now lives in the backyard of HK Austin, or a hostel. And now we're a hostel with a goat. And immediately people wanted to come out, take photos with the goat, like text their mom that's been raising a goat before, and things like that. And so it's basically just like, now we're a hostel with a goat. And it seems very basic, but again, it's more context and it's more handles for them to talk to their friends about than a hostel without a goat, And so just always like, what interesting things can we do?
That's so much fun. And I have to ask too, first of all, does the goat have a name?
Yes, its name is Turtle. I didn't name it, but the hostel employees did. So.
That is the cutest thing I've ever heard in my life. I absolutely love it. I would suspect too that having a goat, it's that hostel, not only provides great marketing, but does it really kind of elevate your customer experience too?
Definitely, yeah. Everybody has fun with the goat. It's kind of it's something that they remember. That they can talk about your friends with. It's people. I think sometimes with hospitality locations, they spend a little bit too much time on. People are going to forget the color of your couch, right? But they're not going to forget the way that they feel there. And so I think that this provides like a feeling to them. They're like, oh, like I'm coming to Austin. I'm meeting this goat at this hostel. That's so weird, And everybody kind of wants to be the center of their own attention, particularly on Instagram and elsewhere. And so it's kind of like just providing them, again, more context and another handle to talk to their friend about.
Yeah, if I stay at a Holiday Inn, I'm not going to
no goats.
take pictures and put it on Facebook. But if I stay at HK Austin, is it HK Austin?
Yep.
HK Austin, I'm going to take a picture with the goat. I'm going to put that on Instagram. I'm going to put that on Facebook. And basically, there's your free marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask you a question. What from your perspective, obviously, there's always some cost-benefit analysis that goes into marketing. And for example, with a goat, you decide to get a goat. There's downsides. You have to take care of the goat. It needs a place to live. Somebody needs to take care of the goat. Is it going to provide the benefits that you think it's? What kind of cost benefit analysis do you do? Is it anything? Is it formal or is it just a gut thing? This sounds like a good idea. I'm going to do it.
Sure. For me personally, it's mainly like a gut thing. I've certainly taken on projects that have become much bigger than we anticipated them being in the beginning. But with clients, you do have to take in a little bit more of the like impact to the brand, because we have worked with bigger authors where, an author will come to us and they'll hire us. So they'll be like, I want Brash Tech because Brash Tech does these interesting ideas. They know how to get media attention. And it's like, great. And so we'll come up with like 5 amazing ideas to get attention for them. But when it comes time to pull the trigger, there's some decision maker along the line where it's like, well, we can't really do that. So I think that you do have to think about like, sure, it's fun getting press. But at the same time, like, that media narrative can go sideways pretty quickly, and it does get repeated so many times. So I mean, it's client specific for sure. Like, so for somebody like Tucker Max, like you could do whatever you wanted because he already has such a bad reputation. Yeah. But if we're working with an author, like we've worked with guys like Tony Robbins, like he obviously has a brand. So you have to be very conscious of that and how these fun things could get misconstrued or go the wrong way and stuff like that. But for me personally, I just gotta go for that. Go for it.
Has there been an example you can share with us where, based on what you needed to stick to with the brand in your, let's call it for lack of a better term for now, a stunt, where a stunt went awry in terms of keeping in sync with the brand and what you did to recover from that?
There were some things. There's definitely been stunts that I have participated in that, like, looking back, it's like it makes you cringe a little bit. You're just like, that wasn't very like cool. But they were mainly isolated, like when we worked with Tucker and stuff like that, and because of his brand was so kind of like edgy to begin with. But since then, to be fully honest, no, the majority of the time they've been pretty fun.
Awesome.
Which is pretty good.
That's so much fun. What a great, fantastic, like, just situation you've got going on. I hate to like lay it on thick, but seriously, Brent, I'm so in awe of all the different things that you do. Just it's just amazing. Amazing. Your story is just incredible, and the creativity that goes behind it in building people's brands and launching things in such a new and disruptive way is fascinating. I think you're so non-traditional marketing, and you're just taking all these new technologies and all these new avenues of the way the world works right now and really capitalizing on that. And like you said, feeding it to the media, feeding it to the press, so that you are you are meeting their needs to ultimately meet your needs is just a great way of looking at things. So I just love seeing how that plays out.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to throw out, so we'll put it in the show notes, but you wrote a couple of years ago an article on medium.com, eight make or break business rules that no one teaches, but everyone should know. And this was a fantastic article. Honestly, if I were to sit down and spend 6 months trying to come up with the the 8 best tips I could come up with, I probably wouldn't have come up with all of these. This is just a great article. So we'll have that in the show notes, but I do want to ask you a couple questions because there are a couple tips in here that are especially good. And I want to hear how you've applied those to your businesses. And I'd love to talk more about the hostel because a lot of the people in our audience are going to be real estate people, and I'm sure they're going to love to hear more about your hostel as well. But one of the things that you talk about is your customers' ideas for your business are probably wrong. So I think that's a really important concept and one that we're all interested in making our customers happy. We don't think about that. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I kind of came to that thought after the first year of the hostel. We put all this time and energy into the hostel, and then particularly when you have a hospitality business like that, people come in and literally face to face will tell you ideas of what you should do at your hostel. And so for us, to give you an example of this is, in the living room of the hostel, there's no TV. So I would say 1 out of every 10 people would come in and be like, why don't you put a TV in the living room? You're like, I want to watch a movie or something like that. But I think it comes from like being strong with the vision that I wanted for the place and staying in a lot of hostels myself. I knew that like if one person come in and put on a weird movie on the living room was supposed to be like kind of the nerve center of the hostel, the place where people create connections. The reason people stay in hostels is to create these connections. And so if one person is watching a movie, the atmosphere is immediately gone from that room. So I think that like it's in this kind of like eager to please the customer world that we live in, the place where like you want to take feedback in stride and change immediately. It is worth kind of like zooming out a little bit and thinking like, is this specific to them or is this going to apply across the board? And maybe there is things that like your customers think are the best things for you, but strongly aren't. And so I think this taking a step back is a pretty important part of it all.
Yeah, that's a great example of the TV because it does something else as well. You're basically defining what type of customers you want in your business, the type of customers that are going to grow your business. And you are subtly telling the rest of the people out there, the people that like TV and that don't want to socialize, we don't want you as a customer. And There's so many business owners that are terrified of alienating anybody in their potential customer base because they just want more money or they think they need everybody to be happy. But you're not scared to basically say, you're not my customer and that's okay, go away.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like you also want to curate the type of customers that you had, like you said. And in a hostel setting, one kind of bad character can really like ruin the entire environment within the hostel. And I think that environment is the reason that people stay in hostels. Environment is the reason people remember hostels. And so we do want to have those kind of like-minded people coming through. And so, I mean, that even goes to things like, where do you get your customers? So I'll give you an example there. Like with hostels in the hostel world, there's different booking engines that you can be on to like attract your customers. So you can be on hostelworld.com and they kind of like are the referral engine, and like Expedia, Orbit. So you can be on all the kind of traditional channels. And we found that when we were on booking.com, we would get people with a different expectation than they would be getting from Hostel World. People from Hostel World very clearly know what they're getting into. They're going to a hostel because that's in the name. On Booking.com, sometimes people will come and not fully understand the idea of being a hostel, kind of the shared element of the hostel, the environment part of the hostel. They would be asking for private rooms with private TVs in the private room. And we found that those people would kind of, again, infect the rest of the customer base that we would have. So we don't use Booking.com anymore, and it seems like, why would you turn down any channel that would get you customers? But we know that the customers that we do have will have much better time if we don't. And so it was another conscious decision that we had to make pretty early on, is like curating that customer base, like you mentioned.
That's awesome.
Right. That's right. And I'm wondering too, it sounds like, I know you've written a lot about, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting, that about 20% of your business should actually be spent on the marketing, but the big bulk of your time, the 80% of your time, should be focused on creating that product that people want in the first place. Did I represent that accurately?
Definitely. I think that like particularly today with like all the information marketers out there and people that are creating these courses and blogs, and like, there's lots of very good ones, but I think sometimes people are in such a rush to like try out the most the newest marketing tactic, spend money on Facebook and they get so wrapped up in the marketing of the product, they don't realize that like, if the product sucks, nobody's going to want to buy it anyways. And so before you get ahead of yourselves and start thinking about all these different marketing avenues to do, make sure you have a product that you're like comfortable that it's going to actually go out there and sell once it exists. Because I'll give you an example. Like, no matter how big of marketing campaign that we put together for a book at Brass Check, whether it's for a startup, a book, no matter what, the only thing that a great marketing campaign can do is kickstart word of mouth. And that's what you're trying to do, because word of mouth is the only thing that's going to sell a product, a business, anything over the long term. And so if the word of mouth isn't there, it's not going to sell for a long time. You might get a flash in the pan, but I think that life's too short to create stuff like that. So if you're really trying to create something you're proud of, spend a lot of time on it, and then worry kind of about the marketing afterwards.
Certainly. It sounds like too, with your hostel, by creating that experience, by doing the no TV thing, by having the goat, did I read somewhere that you splurge on your beds? Like that is
right.
I'm sure people are so super comfy and don't want to get up in the morning and just love their bed, right? By creating that type of experience, you're really looking at a long-term vision rather than just pleasing customer by customer. So it looks at the more holistic approach.
Definitely. It's again, just zooming back out and thinking about what is putting a TV might get that one good review, but what's going to kind of maintain the good reviews over time and keep people coming back. And I think again, it's that atmosphere.
Yeah, you can drive 100 million people to your product, but if it's not a good product, it's not sustainable.
Right. Exactly.
So I want to talk about something else, and I imagine this is not necessarily real estate, but I think a lot of people in our audience who are real estate investors are going to get a kick out of this story. A few years ago, you bought a 300-acre ghost town.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was your motivation? What were you thinking? What's your plans?
Just under a year ago, July 13th, we closed on Friday the 13th because Ghost Town, Friday the 13th, fun press angle with it. Yep. It was also my business partner, John Beer's birthday that day. And so again, even there, it's so much. Closing on a ghost town is inherently interesting. And so closing on Friday the 13th, just that another handle to it for the press to talk about. But with that, it was again, going back to what's fun and what's interesting. So I'm obviously very interested in hospitality. So for a long time, I've been thinking about the hostel and kind of what's next after the hostel. And so my friend John Beer and I had been looking at different properties around the country, and we didn't really have a set criteria or thesis, but I think that the main thesis was something that you touched on earlier, is basically travelers today are looking for experiences that are available nowhere else. They want that thing that they can put on Instagram that looks interesting. They don't want the white box cookie cutter Marriott. They want these one of a kind experiences. And so for me, I was thinking there's got to be places that can provide that have a little bit of history and story to them themselves. And then as a storyteller, I was confident that we would be able to relay a story around a property to the press pretty well and get attention for it. So John and I were looking at properties in the Catskills, outside, just 2 hours outside of New York. And then our friend forwarded us a link that a former mining town was for sale in California called Cerro Gordo. And immediately kind of the marketing brain in me was just lit up. I was like, oh my God, there's so many stories we could tell about a ghost town that's for sale. And it was for sale for just about $1 million. And I mean, as somebody living in New York and somebody that lives in major cities, you can't get an apartment in New York for $1 million.
Right.
So the thought that we would buy this former town, I knew as marketers, we would get so much attention for it that if at the very least we could resell it for multiples of what we bought it for, just because of the press around it. And so, yeah, we bought it in July. It was a exercise in it's kind of your social capital, because it was a very hot property. There's lots of offers on it. And so John and I went in strong for the real estate people. We went in and we said, listen, we'll close in 7 days in all cash. And neither John nor I had anywhere near the cash on hand to buy a ghost town. And so we forwarded over $50,000 in earnest money, really kind of putting our, going to make it happen. And so from then we raised the money from some family and friends through text messages from clients that we had built up goodwill with over time. And originally we bought it because I think the way I thought about it was if I was on my deathbed and I was talking to my grandson or something, if I could say that I once upon a time bought a town with a bunch of friends, that's worth it to me. It was an interesting story. It's something that should be fun. At the very least, we'd have this beautiful playground to hang out with. But since closing, it's interesting. It's the plan's becoming more real. We've brought on a real estate developer that's done a lot of great destination resorts in the past. Somebody that's done a place called Dunton Hot Springs in Colorado. That's a former ghost town that's been turned into a resort. A place called Amangiri in Utah, which is like a super aspirational resort. And so we're bringing the team together around it. And I think for me personally, what I've learned from that is when I opened the hostel, I thought I had to do everything. I really always wanted to white knuckle it. I was going to play the front desk man. I was going to be the landscaper. I was going to be the check-in guy. I was going to be the this and the that. And I thought that was what building a company was to me. Is like, I need to have my hands in all parts of this. And I think it's a common thing that people go through when they're starting businesses. And so with Cerro Gordo, I see my main job as just finding, attracting, and convincing to work with us the best talent in the world for each of those roles. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been definitely taking a step back. Like, I'm not going to be changing the sheets at Cerro Gordo, but I'm going to find the best hotel operator that does the best job. And so, we've put together a great design team, a developer, capital partners, architects, engineers, the whole kind of crew. And it's been very, very rewarding so far. We're having a blast with it. So if anybody ever has a couple extra hours, it's 3 hours outside of LA, to the east, in between Sequoia National Park and Death Valley National Park. It's stunning. And we have a caretaker named Robert who's there 24/7. Robert has lived on the hill for 21 years straight. And if you'd like, you're more than welcome to go up and take a tour.
So fun. Thank
awesome.
you.
We do a lot of national park tours with our family. So we're going to add that to our, next time we go down towards Sequoia, we're going to add that to our list. Thank you.
I want to follow up on that. One more question on that, Brent. So is Cerro Gordo, is that one of your first business ventures where you've not white knuckled it as much, where you've kind of relinquished some control and brought other people in? And if yes, how did that process go? How did that feel for you to get to that place of trust?
Definitely. I think that it was a function of a couple of things. All the other businesses, whether it's the marketing company, our marketing company, while we do a lot of work, it's quite small. There's 3 partners and we have 2 employees. So it's a very lean and mean team. But because of that, we do a lot of the stuff ourselves. There's a lot of that white knuckling. And so with Cerro Gordo, it was 2 things. One, I have quite a few other projects going on. So it was just like a function of time. There was no way I could possibly do everything myself. And then 2, it's just releasing that ego a little bit. I'm not at all the best designer in the world. And so if we want to create something that we're proud of, why would we not try to attract kind of the best designers that we could? Why would we not bring in the best architect and kind of like learn something from all of them? Because the way that at least I'm seeing Cerro Gordo is, if Cerro Gordo becomes what we want it to become, then it'll be a stepping stone to the future projects, and it'll allow me that. So if that means giving up control or equity or whatever it means, it's more than worth it in the long term for any time of short-term loss that we have to do.
That's
Absolutely.
Great. And I really enjoyed all the comments that came as a result of all the press coverage that you got from that. It sounds like, once you have developed it in what you want to be, it sounds like there will be no lack of people who want to live there pretty much full time. I think they're going to be beating down your door. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
It's something you can have fun.
Yep.
You can potentially make money, and it's a great story.
Yeah, it's a personally fulfilling story, and like it's interesting too. Like just getting to know people in that area. It's a part of the world that's very interesting to me. And so John and I have been spending a lot of time out there. We've been seeing kind of firsthand how quickly news can spread, even when you don't want it to. To give you an example, like news spreads quick in small towns, and so it's just it's a very fun exercise for us. And if there's any other lesson I could pull from it, it's kind of the power of. So with Cerro Gordo, when we bought it, we kind of went into hyperdrive of like press. So we just wanted to get as much press as we could. And because again, press feels good, this and that. We use the press to get some capital partners, but also press is interesting. I think the biggest benefit for press for anybody, including ourselves, is the inbound stuff that happens for it. The other side of the equation of that, emailers, people that end up emailing you, they need to hear about you first. And I think for me, what's most personally rewarding is like the inbound people that have come from Cerro Gordo. So to give you an example, the developer I mentioned before, the guy that has done Dunton Hot Springs and Amangiri, he emailed me once he saw an article in the New York Times about it. And so if you are trying to think through the value of press, at least in my own mind, the value of press is kind of in the inbound inquiries that come from it.
Excellent. So that said, what are your thoughts on on paid marketing? We're talking a lot about all these alternative ways of looking at marketing, all of these created and awesome ideas. But what are your thoughts on paid marketing? Do you pay for marketing, or do you not see a need for that anymore?
So within Brash Tech, we have a company called Daily Stoic, and Daily Stoic is a book that Ryan wrote. But on the back end of it, we created an online platform around it. A website that gets a lot of the email list is pretty big, and on the back end of that, we created an e-commerce store. So we have a place where we sell coins, prints, and different things related to Stoicism. And so in that one, we do use a lot of paid advertising. We use Facebook advertising because it's very concrete and tangible what the cost and reward is. So I think if you can at least assign a value to, let's say you're using online or paid advertising to get email addresses. If you can assign a value to it, I think it's very valuable, because then if an email to you is worth $1 and you can spend 50 cents getting it, then you can spend money all day long, right? But I think sometimes people use paid advertisement for like the vague concept of exposure, and I don't necessarily think that's a good use of it. If you can't tie an actual number to it, then I don't know if paid advertising is the best route. But if you have a product, if you have that, like if you start your first Shopify store and you're making mugs, and you know that your mugs cost you $10 to make and that you sell them for 30 and you can sell them for 15 using Facebook ads, then like definitely you should use Facebook ads all day long. And so I think it just depends on the person and the goals that they're trying to do. But yeah, we've utilized Facebook advertising quite a bit, the paid ads for the Daily Stoic, with pretty good returns.
That's awesome. So let me ask you a question. If you had to give one piece of generic advice to our listeners, and I know this is putting you on the spot, but just our listeners are a mix of small business owners, real estate investors, other people that are getting into the content world, like a lot of your clients. One or two great tips for them just to improve their marketing, to improve their PR and advertising strategies.
Sure. I think first off, this might seem very basic, but it's surprising how many clients of ours don't have this. It's like build an email list. Emails are pretty much the only avenue that you fully control these days. Facebook can change an algorithm and suddenly you're reaching half the people they reached before. Instagram can delete your account tomorrow. So the 7 years you built building 1 million followers on Instagram doesn't mean anything. And so no matter what you're doing, no matter who you are, at the very least have a generic email capture on your website. Ideally put some type of effort into it. Say like, provide an incentive, like sign up to get my 3 best tips on real estate investing or something. But no matter who you are, if you're trying to build something, an email list is valuable because then you can reach those people again. So I think that would be kind of like base foundational level email list. That's kind of the biggest thing. And then second, like if you are interested in getting press, because I think that's like a lot of people, like they light up like the thought of getting press, is there's a couple ways to do it. I think a lot of people think they wait for that New York Times profile. They're like, I'm doing interesting stuff, and eventually like the New York Times is going to profile me because I'm doing interesting stuff. But like in reality, the New York Times doesn't know who you are. The New York Times doesn't know who anybody is. And so waiting for stuff like that to happen isn't the way to approach it. I would think, what can I do that's interesting? And so like I've said that before, but like it doesn't mean you have to go out and necessarily purchase a goat to like do something interesting. Doing something interesting can also mean writing an interesting article about a topic that's like in the news at that moment. And so if you can provide like an interesting take on it, that is another reason for the media to kind of reach out to you. I'll give you an example. So like Ryan does this fantastically. So like whenever the election was going on, Ryan wrote an article about Trump being elected. He wrote this article, 30 reasons dad don't vote for Trump or something to that effect. And that was just like enough context for like, he said something interesting related to it to then like news media reached out to him to kind of be on interviews and videos like this. So like, it's a more proactive approach to like, instead of sitting back, what I'm trying to say is like, take a more proactive approach to press rather than reactive. You can't wait for the press to hear about you. You have to go out there and do something interesting for them to hear about you, whether that's like a stunt kind of thing that we're doing or saying something interesting. That's going to be your quickest way to send the media attention.
That's awesome. It's so funny. I'm not a marketing advertising guy. That's Carol's world. She's been doing that for her whole life. I'm more the introverted engineer, quantitative guy on the other side, but just preparing for this interview and reading about what you've done and what you're doing. I said to Carol the other night, after this interview, I have a feeling I'm going to want to just go start a marketing company, even though I know I wouldn't be any good at it, just because it sounds like so much fun. I mean, it's just these crazy challenges of how you take something unknown and you use the resources around you in creative ways to make it known.
Yeah, it's fun. Just like, again, like have fun with it. Just sit down one day and think like, what are 10 crazy things I could do? And then the idea that you're like, well, I couldn't do that is usually the idea you probably should do. That's the one that like is the most fun and will get the press attention. And again, there's no harm in trying, you put it out there. And then if you do start getting traction, press is weird where it becomes a bit of this echo chamber and kind of like snowball effect where press just repeats press because it's on press's radar. Meaning like now, if some press comes up and they're like, we need owner of Ghost Town to talk about something, I imagine we would be who they reach out to because we have a high profile ghost town at this point. And that became, and so like because of the press we already got will lead to more press in the future. And I think that applies for no matter who you are. And so yeah, just get started, try some stuff out, and have fun with it.
Yeah, became the ghost town expert by your creation. That's a beautiful thing.
Next time CNN does a segment on ghost towns, they're calling.
Yep, you're first on the list. So I'd like to move now, Brent, to the part of the show that we call 4 More. Okay, so these are 4 questions and a more question that we ask all of our guests. And we're going to fire them at you pretty quick. So you ready?
Okay, I'm ready. Yep.
Okay, so number 1, what was your very, very first or your very, very worst job? And what lessons did you learn from it?
My first job was at a golf course. I worked at a golf course, which is pretty fantastic because I learned golf. And golf has stayed with me my entire life. I still play golf to this day. So I think it was very beneficial in that way. Things I learned from it is, that's weird. I actually never thought about that. But like, I was a cart guy. So I would have to pick up people from their car when they come to the golf course. It was a private club. So I would sit there, members would come, we would pick them up from the car and bring them into the clubhouse. And even at age 14 or 15, however, it was like, you would get to know what members tipped you and which ones didn't. So obviously the ones that didn't, you wouldn't be the quickest to run out there and grab their bag. And we're talking like $1 tip because I was like 14 or 15. But like that $1 would mean the difference of me like busting my ass and running out to get you from your car with a golf cart, or me just kind of like going back to the cart barn and having like another Gatorade or something. And so I think that like instilled me of like treating service people industry right, and like that small investment of $1 or $2 could go a really long way, and people do remember it. And so, yeah, I think that's what I learned from it.
Excellent.
See, that was his first job. That was his first job. My worst job was working at a country club,
really,
bar. Because of that, the golfers never wanted to tip. Maybe I was just really bad at my job when I was 14. But
no, they're an interesting bunch for sure.
So, question number 2. What was that defining moment when you said to yourself, I have the entrepreneurial itch and I really need to go out on my own and not follow the script?
It was definitely after, like I mentioned, I graduated from Columbia, and then I got the job with the investment bank, and it was very important in a lot of ways. My parents were proud. They're like, oh, my son's working at an investment bank. And so the thought to just like completely leave that. But I looked at the people that were maybe 5 years along the path that I was on, and they weren't happy. They were kind of like living in a nice apartment, but none of them were having a good time, or at least that I saw it. And I always thought I could go back to it. I can always go back and do it again if I need to. And so I decided to kind of like cut the reins. And at first, I remember I was living in Brooklyn, and I was writing like freelance articles for some credit card website for $5 an article or something, or anything just to make it work. But I knew to me that like I didn't want to go back to the kind of suit and tie job, and just kind of figured out what I needed to do to make it.
Awesome. Excellent. So number 3 is, we all know there is just a plethora of really, really bad advice out there. So what's the very worst advice that you have ever been given, and what'd you do with it?
And let's keep this in the marketing PR space, because I know there's probably a lot of bad advice there.
Yeah, I'm going to echo on something you said before, but like I think there was a guy that literally looked at me and said that you need to spend 20% of your time making the product and 80% of your time marketing the product, like we touched on before. And it's just like such bad advice. Obviously, people love the 80-20 Pareto principle kind of thing, context to say stuff, but like that's just not true. That's not how things last. That's not how, McDonald's was built. That's not how the Yankees were built. It's just not like something that I think holds. And so I think that like flipping that on its head and spending a bit more time on creating a product that you're proud of is more important.
That's great. So number 4, what's something you've personally splurged on, but that was totally worth it?
A goat.
Can you tell us how much you spent on that goat and what the holding costs are?
It wasn't necessarily splurge. The goat was $40. He was located in rural Texas. It was terrifying picking up. I went to a essentially compound that had like black fence all around it at around 8 p.m. to pick him up. But it was it's been really rewarding. I don't have any kids or anything, but like the goat comes up to me every day, and he provides some type of structure, even if that makes sense. In the morning, I have a routine that I need to do, and it kind of sets the tone for the day. So it's been very, very beneficial for me.
I love Turtle.
Yeah, he's the best.
We will get a picture of Turtle. If you give us a picture,
Yes, please.
Picture in the show notes. Okay, so that was the 4. So here's the more question. Okay. Where can people find out more about you, and how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. My name, I have an email address, like BrentUnderwood.com. I kind of have some thoughts. If you put me in Google, there's some other things come up. And my email address is my last name and my first name @gmail.com. Happy for people to email me. Obviously, I think I'm a big fan of blind emails, so would love to hear from anybody. Happy to help out how I can. If you have a book idea or kind of a marketing idea, it gets me excited to kick around fun ideas. So if you're thinking of some crazy stunt and want to think, how can I make sure this gets the most attention? Let me know. I'll hash it out with you.
Awesome. Brent, thank you so much for being on our show. We are such fans and just absolutely admire all the great stuff you're doing, and can't wait to follow your adventure and see what's next.
Great. Thank you guys so much. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. That was our interview with Brent Underwood. What do you think, Jay?
I thought that was a fantastic interview. I'm a big fan of Brent. I actually know somebody that stayed at his hostel a couple months ago and said that Brent was literally there in the common area chatting with his guests.
What?
Who does that?
That's awesome.
That is absolutely awesome.
He's so rocks.
That's the kind of business owner I want to be. I aspire to be, and I think everybody should be aspire to be.
He's wonderful.
Yeah, just hang out with your customers. That's
right?
Awesome.
So good.
My favorite tip from the interview: send 10 to 20 emails a week to random people. Not random people, but people that put out content that you love, people that do things that you appreciate. Just send 10 to 20 emails a week saying thank you for doing what you do. It's a great way to network. It's a great way to keep in touch with people. It's a great way to build your network. So I thought that was just absolutely the best tip. I'm going to start doing that this afternoon.
Completely agree. Like, that was worth the whole episode in and of itself, right? It's such an easily actionable item. And if you do it consistently over and over, it helps you build your network, helps you build your brand. It's just beneficial all the way around. So Brent was awesome. We're super excited to bring you even more awesome guests like Brent. And while we're here, I want to take a quick second to thank each of you for something. You know what you did? You helped us hit number two in all of the entirety of Apple Podcasts business category. So thank you so much for listening. Keep tuning in, and let's keep the momentum going. One last thing, if you or someone in your network would be a great guest, we would love to hear from you. Just go over to biggerpockets.com/guest and fill out the application. We'd love to hear your story. Again, that's biggerpockets.com/guest. Okay, should we wrap this up?
I think we're good.
Let's do it.
She is Carol. I am Jay.
Now go make headlines in your business today. Rock on, rock stars. See you soon.
See ya.